Okay, so there we go. I think I'm recording. I'm hoping I am. So welcome to everyone here offline and online. Thank you for being here. I think I would like to show the room quickly. We're here in Geneva at the Fact Lab, an innovation space within the University of Geneva. We have a few people around the room. Some of them know each other from before. Not everyone does. There might be some new faces around. And we certainly, for the first time, have people joining from far away. So I would like to, I will mute myself and I will put you on, yes, this is, I have to think about the cloud recording. I'll mute myself and I will put you on high volume on my computer, and would like you to introduce all to each of you who is online in turn, maybe starting with Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris. I am the coordinator for MyData Korea Hub, and I'm here to show support for MyData Geneva, and I'm very glad to be here. This is actually the first hub meeting I've ever attended, so it's very nice to be here, very nice to meet you guys. And in case you guys are available, we will be having, MyData Korea will be having our first hub meeting in November. So we'll try to make this also online if possible. So maybe we'll see you there. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Chris. Temo, I can unmute you and you can speak, so you don't have to deal with that.
Okay, hi Paul-Olivier, and hi everybody else. Hi, my name is Temu. In case you don't know, I work as the general manager of MyData Global, so it's always exciting to see stuff happening. Geneva Hub is particularly active lately. I'm just on my way from Espoo, actually, with Vivi. Vivi can say hi as well. Hi. Back to Helsinki. So I'll be following for a few minutes, and then I need to go, unfortunately. Thanks very much for making this happen.
Thank you, Temu. Is Omgman in the room or not?
I am. Hello. I'm a private individual, very excited to find MyData and the concepts behind it. I've been working on community software to promote resiliency, post-disaster and post-conflict, and having personal information managed by yourself is critical to it. So I'm very glad to find you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, it's a bit difficult. It's the first time. And everyone else is here in the room. So I think we don't have yet the capacity to go around the room. It's going to be a bit difficult. So we'll do that the next time around, or we'll try to. The first speaker today is Salman. I think he's ready to talk, but we might have a little bit of a few seconds. Yeah, a few seconds to do the gap for the sound and to make sure that everything is okay.
So I'm going to unmute. Can you hear me? You might want to mute yours because there's an echo. Yes? And might want to turn off the speaker. Yes, perfect. Yeah, so I'm Salman Farman. Should I just start, or do we want to test? Or that's a good idea. Can you hear me? Oh. Nod everyone if you can hear me. Do I get some nods? Yes, perfect. Okay, and you can hear me too. So my name is Salman Farman. I guess I've been involved in technology for the past 20 years as an entrepreneur and as a venture capitalist. I studied computer science many decades ago, and I code for a hobby. And a few years ago, I built my own personal server and learned some lessons that I think are worth sharing, which I've been starting to do. And it's really about a path towards freedom and autonomy. And I think autonomy is really important. People talk about data freedom, they talk less about data autonomy, which, if you talk about sort of human beings, we think about freedom and autonomy going hand in hand, but we don't talk about data autonomy. And I think that's important. If you look at it in the internet, it's obviously a complex subject philosophically, but you can, a simple explanation is to say it's a capacity for self-determination or self-governance, which I think is perfect for our data. And I think that's sort of the promise of all personal servers, is to provide autonomy for your data. So you actually control your own data. And my own story started, let me see if sort of a few years ago, where I was using Evernote. Actually, I love Evernote, but the more I used it, the more I really felt queasy about having my data sitting on Evernote servers. I wanted to have my own app on my own server, so I started building my own server to host my note-taking app. And I've been using that for the past 4 or 5 years to take all my notes and host it on my own server. And the things that I discovered effectively are that to get to data freedom and autonomy, you need app independence and server portability. So kind of, I guess kind of big words, but I'll try to explain what I mean by both of those and why I think they are important. So take a step back. When we talk about our data, we often think about Facebook or these consumer services where their business model is that, they allow us to go on their sites and do all sorts of things, and they get to keep our data, and they use that data to generate advertisements and generate revenues for themselves. There's a whole other world out there for businesses, which is and really I'm talking about infrastructure as a service, which is about cloud services. And in that world, really the customer is king, and the customer owns the data. And the customer here can be a startup, can be a large bank. And clearly if a large bank goes to like a Google or an Amazon and outsources their infrastructure, Google and Amazon don't own the bank's data. The bank owns their customers' data. They are the king, which is different from the world of consumer services, where the service providers, the Googles and Amazons of the world, ironically, who are sort of providing consumer services as well, they are the kings. So I think really if we think about our data, we want to be in the world where we are the kings. We're in the world where the data belongs to us, where we can host it wherever we want. And we want it to be based on standard and open source software. If you think about these web services, these infrastructure as a service, they're really based on things like Linux and NoSQL databases, sort of like semi-standard software. They try to lock you in different ways, but you can avoid that. And as long as you're not locked in, they know that you can move. And because they know you can move, their whole focus is to provide the best service for you, as opposed to the world of consumer services, where they have the best engineers of the world trying to figure out how to keep you on their site longer. And that's the big difference. And I think, when we talk about, especially about personal servers, but even about our data, we should think about, the world on the right, where the customer, us, we are the kings. So when I started to build my own little note-taking app, obviously I wanted to build on cloud services, and I actually built it up, obviously using open source software, based on Node.js and Mongo at the time. When I first built it, I was actually hosted on Red Hat OpenShift, and then they changed their software, so I moved to Amazon. And Amazon gave me a free year, and then after a year, they started charging me like 20 euros a month. And I was like, no, I don't want to pay 20 euros a month, so I moved to Google. And then I moved from Google to Heroku finally. And I can't tell you how liberating that is, to be able to actually take all of your server, your data, your URL, and move everything from one provider to another provider. This is what businesses do. This is what consumers should be able to do. And in order to do that, we effectively, it's incredibly empowering to be able to be in that position to move, and to be able to have all these fantastic companies basically competing so that you can you host your data, your server on their services. So in order to do that, basically, the way that I built my own server was to have a little API to different cloud services. So basically, I could easily move to different cloud services without changing the core software. And that allows me the freedom to be able to actually move from Red Hat to Amazon to Heroku without changing anything fundamental. And it actually creates a level playing field between these guys, which is again, the opposite of the world of consumer services where you know, you're kind of locked into a service and there are incredible, and they're great businesses because they create incredible economies of scale, and they because of the network effects, you're kind of, you know, you're on these services. So that's really the promise of, for me, that's sort of the first important thing that I discovered about my own server, is that if you have server portability, you're the king, you are, you know, as the customer, and you can easily move, you can have these services competing to offer you the best service in various ways. And at scale, you can imagine that will be very powerful if we have an ecosystem of apps and servers running off of these servers and these services. So next is app independence. So obviously I talked about my note-taking app. Obviously, I didn't build a server to have just one note-taking app. I wanted to have different apps running off of my server. And so one of the questions, and I think if you talk to different personal server providers, they will give you different answers of what an app is. And I think it's really important and of value to actually define what an app is. And for me, an app, an independent app, is an app where the logic of the application is not intertwined into the server logic. So this can be whatever, an iPhone app or an app on your desktop. But what's important is that the app itself is not integrated into the server software so that it becomes proprietary or non-standard effectively. What I really wanted is to have apps which are only tied to the rest of the server via a simple API, right? So an API that allows you to read or write from the server. And basically provide a UI around that service, and this allows this allows you to disintegrate effectively the server stack, if that's comprehensible, and separate it out so that apps can also interoperate between different servers. So, you know, effectively for me, if you know, this is a little bit more technical than my data talk, which is what this talk is based on. But an app is basically a bundle of HTML, or you can think of an app as a bundle of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript app. Basically, what it takes to create a simple web page. And the only difference with a very simple sort of beginner web page is that it has access to an API, which gives access to the server. And so, and once you have that, once you have an API for the apps and an API for the cloud, and for the cloud services, what's left in the middle is actually, you know, a very small layer of middleware, I call it, which just handles permissioning so that you can have different apps accessing the database or the file servers based on the conditions that you give them. You know, you want the apps, you know, you want to have fully control of the apps. So these apps are sitting on your server. You want to be able to delete them when you want. You want to be able to keep your data and move to another app. And you want to have, and allow that app to access your data. And basically all this sort of middleware needs to do is to manage those permissions so that you are in control. And that's how effectively what I built and what I call Freezer is that sort of small layer in between. The advantage here obviously is that if you have an API for apps, an API to the cloud, which are semi-standard, anybody can build that authentication and permissioning level. So, you know, the Freezer that I've built is kind of in a way a prototype. It's something that I've been using for the past 4 years, but it's a prototype software. It's not sort of tested for mass usage in any way, but it's sort of, and so tomorrow, if somebody else creates a better middleware, I can easily move all of my services and my apps and my URL to their server. And I think that's sort of the way that I'm thinking about what a personal server should be and what app independence is and what server server portability means as well. So this was a little bit abstract. I don't know if you followed, but I thought that the best way to sort of say what I mean is to go to actually and I'll actually start a web browser and do a little demo. So actually, when I first talked to Polylivier about what I was doing, he said, oh, try out Glitch. So Glitch is this great little software company. It's sort of a playground for apps. It's a company based in New York. And they allow you to replicate apps. So because I could, sort of my freezer infrastructure was something that could run on different environments, be it Amazon or Google or what have you, I could easily port it to Glitch as well. So if you see this, so anybody, I'm on a, this is just a what is it, private mode. So there's not, there's nothing I've done before. I've just gone to glitch.com, Salmon FF Freezer, and there you can see, and any of you can do that, and you can see my server there, right? And what I can do as somebody who's just come onto the server, I can say remix to edit. And basically what Glitch does is basically creates a server for me, right? So that's how easy it should be to actually create a server. So after a few minutes, I actually have my own server, and it's going to be at windy-people, and if actually I can actually change that and call it whatever, call it something like GVA demo, right? Ooh, GVA demo, right? And actually right now, so I have my own server in 2 seconds running off GVA demo at glitch.com, and I'll show you the URL later, but I can go and see my app. So basically this is Freezer starting up. This is my own server. I'm the first user, so I'm gonna just, sort of put myself, as the first user, and register myself. And there we go. I actually have my own server running. The server doesn't have any apps on it, right? But that's easy. Like I said, apps in this world are just bundles of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They're sitting on a zip file anywhere. They could be sitting on GitHub or on your server or anywhere else. In this case, I created actually a little demo for the Helsinki conference, and I put it under my GitHub. So obviously, this is a very simple interface, but org.mydata.exe. So I created this little app called Yixi Note. And it's put it on GitHub, and all I need to do is to say, put the URL in there, and I put download and install, and this goes, the Freezer goes to the GitHub, downloads a zip file, it's an application, it installs the application, and there we go. Now I have an app sitting on my server. And I can say, something like, what if it, hello, Vienna and Korea. Is that where people are? Something like that. Anyways, so I can save this note. And by the way, it's called Yixi Note because Yixi in Finnish means one. So this is kind of, in this app, you can actually just create one note and save it. So it's not a very complex app. But what you can do also is that once I've saved this note, and I can refresh this, right? So the note is there. There's this permission model based on phones. I won't get into it too much, but I can say, hey, this app is asking me to actually be able to publish publish whatever data that I save on it, right? So I'm going to grant permission to this app to publish my data, and then I go publish, right? Great. So now this node is published, which means that if any of you go to, and if I go to, like, let's say my home page, first of all, you see the app, that's my Yixi Note app, which is sitting on my server. And if I go to my public page, which anybody can do, you can see that my note is actually publicly accessible. So just to, the reason I went through this is to say, it can take me 2 minutes to create my own server, to create an app, to store private data on it, and then share that data if I want to, right? That's how easy it should be. And if we want to control our data and have, in my view, we should all have our personal servers, there's no reason that we shouldn't. And it should be as easy as this. Now, there's like a million reasons why, not a million, there's like 4 reasons why I wouldn't use glitch.com to store my sensitive data, and I won't get into that. But this demo kind of provides how easy it should be for all of us to have our servers and to have our data. The reason I showed Yixi Note, I don't know if I get the pronunciation right. Timo's probably gone now. He would have corrected me. But the reason I showed Yixi Note is that if we go back here, I'm going to go back to my presentation. Yixi Note means, oops. like I said, IXI node means one node, so you can actually just save one node and publish it. It was the simplest app that I could think of where I could do it with this much code. So this is all the code it took me to write IXI node. You know, granted, it's not a very complex app, but that's how simple it is to actually create an app, or that's how simple it should be to create an app. And obviously make it more complex and create more complex apps. There's no reasons why you can't create very, very complex apps with this infrastructure. But here with, you know, basically 50 lines of code and really 20 lines of JavaScript, I've created this app, which is a note-taking app. And I also have a little logo there, which is the IXI node logo that I created one night. Exactly, it took me the longest to create the logo with a little bit of a sense of humor. You know, I talk about the API. So basically, if you think about an app, basically, you know, any beginner or any, you know, even advanced, you know, be it a beginner or an advanced sort of JavaScript front-end developer, they can easily create, you know, or port their sort of like front-end app to this kind of infrastructure, as long as they have access to this API, which is basically just a sort of a JavaScript file that gives you access to a login, write, query, get an item, upload a file, and give permissions or ask for permissions. And that's sort of the API layer that I kind of depicted before. Basically, it's these things. It's a little bit more than this, but these are the basic elements in the API. And actually what I'm proposing, and actually one of the things that came out of this MyData conference in Helsinki, which I need to follow up on, and I've had a couple of conversations about, is that, you know, today you have a whole bunch of different people creating personal servers, and frankly, there's not that much usage of these personal servers. And one of the reasons it's not that much usage is because they're not, you can't make like cat pictures and such stuff with it. It's just like, it's not fun enough. And I think that one of the things that, or, you know, one of the things that would be great for people who believe that personal servers are part of the answer is to have interesting apps. And because they're different servers, one of the things we talked about is to actually have common endpoints for different personal servers or different apps to access different types of personal servers. You know, be it Personium in Japan or MyData in Vienna, et cetera, to be able to own your data, sorry, in Vienna, basically to have these common endpoints where if I create an app for, you know, taking one note, I can actually run that on Personium as well as on Freezer. And so this is kind of like a work in process, or this is, or the beginning of a work in progress, I should say, is to sort of have these common endpoints. And actually one of the things that I would be interested later from the MyData community is to sort of understand how this ties into the different kinds of standardization efforts going on, and whether there's sort of overlap and how to deal with that. So that's a subject of conversation. So I'm gonna finish this off, this is sort of the final slide. I think what we're talking about here is, or what I said that I sort of built this personal server in order, and came across a couple of different concepts that I think are really important, and that being sort of app autonomy or rather app independence and autonomy and server portability. But I think what also I've stumbled upon is this idea of disintegrating the web stack, where if you can actually create, you know, if you have a typical kind of web server somewhere, you have an integrated level of technology that's all kind of intertwined together from the server until the user interface. And if we think about standardization in a way in the future, you know, maybe it'd be worthwhile to think about how we can disintegrate that stack. And already at the bottom of the stack, you have these commodity cloud services, which are effectively providing, you know, very standard functionalities, like, you know, getting your node server running and NoSQL databases. And that's already kind of commoditized, so you can leverage that. And then the other would be to have apps, like I discussed, to have sort of independent apps, which are completely disintegrated and separate from the rest of the server logic. And this allows different people to create apps for different ecosystems and be able to scale and be able to be comfortable that their apps can run on different personal servers. And so that sort of separates out that layer. And all that's left in the middle, which is kind of this freezer concept, is, well, you need to sort of integrate those APIs and do some authenticating and permissioning, which is what I've done with Freezer in my own way. And I should just end by saying that I'm not a professional coder. This is a hobby, but I'm sort of passionate about this project, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you. How are we going to do the questions and not do a Larsen? So maybe first, are there questions in the room that you might need to repeat? If,
yeah, sure.
Or questions. If you have questions, I don't know if people can hear me away.
Does anybody have questions? Is what Olivier is saying. And feel free to unmute if you do, or anybody here, or do we move on to the next one?
I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not a developer, so I might not phrase it correctly. So,
yeah, sure.
So you're talking about app independence, and originally you were saying that basically the app does not need to be intertwined with the server on, and it has to actually use an API. But my understanding is that a normal practice or the general practice is to use APIs. So are you talking about using an API that is independent on the application, but is just, so because what I understood at the end of the presentation is that what you actually propose is to have one middleware with one API that is generic enough so any application can actually use this API. You know?
Yes, exactly. And actually, that's one thing that I forgot to talk about. So basically, the question is, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, but just so others can hear, basically, one, what is the difference between this API and sort of API for whatever, all the other applications that are out there, which I think you answered yourself, but I answer again as well. And the second one being that, is this idea that you have one API which can respond to all apps, and basically I guess you answered that as well. And the answer to that is yes. So the idea here is that yes, can we effectively dumb down the API enough so that it is generic across apps? And if you can do that, you're kind of liberating the top level to be completely generic, right? Today, whatever, if you have Facebook has an API, which they can restrict and they control, you have Twitter has an API, and all these companies have APIs, and they're great APIs and they're very complex. So if you reduce that API to very, very simple operations, you lose complexity. You lose a lot of fascinating things that people do. And really, the question that I would ask is, is that all necessary? Especially if the app is sitting on your server. And what are there obviously there's set of applications. If you do dumb down this API and make it as simple as I propose, there's a whole set of applications that you won't be able to run. You can address those in different ways. But I think more interesting is to say, well, if you do have such a simple API, how many applications that are interesting could you actually build? And I think that universe is actually pretty big, right? So what I'm proposing is that every time you actually have a disintegration, you have kind of something which is simplified, you constrain yourself and you're like, oh my God, I can't do 10 other things, but you liberate a lot of other energy. And sort of this is what I'm proposing.
The concern would be with the security of the app.
Yes, so security is yes, and so the other question is the security of the app. And that is a very, very big question, right? So because security is a problem at all levels, right? And ultimately, it's, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Node, but Node and NPM are basically, a lot of developers are building servers using a lot of open source software, which is actually out there, and they're just integrating, and there's like huge security holes. And what's really interesting, I have this thing that I like to say is that it's totally unsafe in theory, but it's actually quite safe in practice. And obviously there's security holes, etc. But I think if you take that model here, what you would be gaining here is that the code will be completely open source, will be completely accessible. And so arguably, there's different ways that I've sort of thought about security, and a few very, very simple things that I've already built into this, which are certainly not enough. But basically, because an app is just a JavaScript file, an HTML file. You have access to it. You can see what it's doing, and you can see if it's communicating your data to the outside world. The app is sitting on your server. So the app is not the HTML JavaScript is not sitting on somebody else's server. You've downloaded it sitting on your server, and so you're in total control of that environment effectively. But certainly security is an issue.
So there is a remote question from J-Man. Is the need for rapidly and easily generating a new server so important? Seems like we would better use an API access to local storage.
I guess the question is, do you want to use local storage? So I assume local storage, like JavaScript local storage, is what they're asking about. Yeah, so the problem with local storage is that you don't have access to it. If you build an app on your iPhone, you don't have access. You can't persist that data and have it again accessible via different means like we're used to today. And there's a limitation on size. And if you have your own, if you actually have a server infrastructure, and it can be whatever serverless, which is the trend, but certainly you can do this with a serverless infrastructure because your data is sitting in your database. It means that you can have that much more data, you can have that much more ways of accessing that data via your apps, and it's all still under your control. But yeah, local storage would enable very, very simple applications, but in a way it's similar concepts. To give you an example, just as an application, so one of the applications I have is I record all my browsing history. And I thought that, it seems like every big company out there and the telecom companies know all my browsing history, and I'm the only one who doesn't have it, right? So, right now I have like whatever, megabytes and megabytes of my browsing history sitting there. And, obviously you wouldn't be able to do that with local storage. And, one day I think that I would build an app that has access to that data that does something interesting with it. So once you have that data under your control, under your server, not only it's your data, but then you can sort of figure out if there's another independent app that comes and says, hey, install this app and I'll do something funky with your browsing history, then you can do that, right? And that's the advantage of having server infrastructure. And it's the advantage of actually building something based on, a couple of years ago, we were talking about like doing everything on crypto and decentralized. And my view is that, hey, we've been like testing the security and all the issues around building this server stack for like the past 20 years. There's a lot of good tried and tested issues. That infrastructure is becoming simple enough, we can actually sort of use that infrastructure for ourselves as consumers. So ease of use is also important because if people are going to use personal servers and it's difficult, they're not going to use personal servers. And if they want, all of the efforts that we have around sort of controlling your data will only get somewhere if there's actually a value proposition to users that is not only protects your data, that not only adds value in various ways that other services can't add value to, but they have to be as simple and as easy as all the other great apps out there.
Yeah, eventually this might be more like a philosophical question following up on what you just said. To make a long story short, about 10 years ago, we used to organize crypto parties. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was empowering for people and stuff. And at some point, I said, stop, this doesn't work. This is a broken approach. Why would we make people, computer scientists, to some extent, managing keys and PKIs and certificates while they don't really necessarily need to understand that. Mm-hmm. So, along the same line of thoughts, I understand you're trying to make something which is usable, but to what extent is it, sustainable as a society to build tools that people will still have to kind of, get familiar with, while it should be kind of baked into the society to some extent.
Wow.
That's my kind of philosophical issue here. I think we ought to know better as a society to build infrastructure, which is kind of, interwoven into the fabric of society.
I think that's a really interesting comment. I don't know. I guess there's various ways of responding to that, and there's no answer, obviously.
I don't have an answer.
No. But I think in a way that's so. this is when we talk about simplicity. I guess this is what I'm saying here is that, you know, if we use tried and tested technologies that are out there, that, you know, 20 years ago cost like $1 million francs to do what I just did in 2 minutes, right? Today it takes 2 seconds, and it's very simple. It's not simple enough for you know, for most people to use, but these are services that are you know, that are geared towards companies that have become so easy that they're almost usable by individuals as well. So in terms of fabric of society, I mean, all of these apps, you know, all the apps that we use every day are part of our society, right?
Yeah.
So, and I guess what I'm, you know, I said, you know, I don't know if I'm not really selling anything here except the concepts, right? So I built my own personal server and thought that there's really interesting concepts around that, which I would want to talk about and have this dialogue. And I think that what I believe is that a structure like this can incorporate most of the apps that we use on a daily basis on a completely different model. So to the extent that whatever app you use every day, whether it's on the web or on your phone or what have you, it, you know, is integrated into your life, those same apps can be based, you know, used within this kind of infrastructure. The only difference being that you're controlling your data, right? So, and the added value being that because you're controlling your data, like I mentioned, my browser history, suddenly you're in control to say, hey, I want this other app that I can install that does, you know, some other thing with my history on it. Right now, you know, Swisscom can only do that or whatever, right? And here, so under your control, so you kind of can have other kinds of interactions which did not exist before. And I think that's the promise of having your own personal server with your personal data. And I certainly agree that, you know, for this to be interesting, it needs to be, you know, I think what I demoed it because I can't believe how easy it is, but obviously it needs to be even easier and secure, etc. Right? So I totally agree that it should be integrated. I guess right now at least I'm at the concept phase, or I'm at the phase where I'm the one user. No, I didn't take it as such, but anyways, I'll answer.
Have you received the interest of open source community to help develop an open source project like this? Because I also find it like super interesting.
No, that's very kind. You know, so I haven't really talked about it with much at great length anywhere. I had like one talk last year, sort of, which was kind of a technical thing, and then it was really MyData at Helsinki. So I think that you know, certainly, you know, I'd be interested in the open source community or whatever that is or other people to be involved in this. And I think the way that I'm going about this now is that is to say, well, let's start with these common APIs, because, you know, everybody has their own project and everybody loves doing their own thing, right? So I'm not going to try to say, well, you who have your personal data want, you know, let's work on Freezer. I don't know if Freezer is even good enough, but let's try to find common elements. And I think that would be really interesting if tomorrow I have an app that runs off of, you know, Personium and Own Your Data and Freezer, then suddenly there's something interesting happening there. And that's why I'm kind of proposing these endpoints as being, or something like this to be kind of a common endpoint for apps to use. Because then once you have apps, then you have interest, and you have open source developers being interested. And so you create that, that cycle.
Je vais te mettre en mute et je vais faire passer Chris.
Should I ask?
Oh.
Hi. So, just yeah, I thought your talk was very interesting. Thank you very much. So, I think what I was really curious about is the common endpoints between PDS, or personal data stores. And you mentioned Personium, so I was kind of wondering, like, I have an interest in Personium as well. I was wondering how you envision the sort of connected endpoints between, say, Personium and maybe one of your own personal data stores, and whether you think this is something that could be done like today if we have the network of like a network of people working together. Or if not, what do you think would be needed in order to make it happen? So Personium is actually developed by, I think it's an open source personal data store that was developed by people at Fujitsu, I believe. And yeah, we actually have a speaker coming to our MyData Korea meeting that was the architect of Personium. So I'm also in the process of learning about it. When I speak to Mr. Shimono, he mentioned something about having a global network of Personium servers that could potentially interact on a global scale. And so I feel like this was something that was that he would find interesting as well, and something along the same lines. But I guess more curious about than the technical details, I think, is how you imagine, say, like from a user's point of view, how it would be different, and yeah, the value, I guess. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so the reason I mentioned Personium is that we were just at this conference, and so we all talked about this idea together. I have to say, they have not seen this little slide that I did with the common endpoint. So this is something that I've been working on myself that I mean to send to them. We had this conversation with the guys at Personium who were there about this idea of saying, well, maybe we should sort of create a way so that an app that I built for my note-taking app can run off of Personium. So we had a first exchange around that, and I'm hoping that that I actually sort of create some sort of proposal to send to them and start a dialogue, and send to others and start a dialogue around doing this. I have not done that yet, so maybe it was not a good idea to talk about it publicly, but I thought it'd be nice to sort of get your feedback as well. They have a whole bunch of people working on this, so they're quite a big effort actually, and they have a lot of users within Fujitsu and some different companies as well. But I think and so the idea here would be, let's just take my note-taking app, right? So my note-taking app is my little simple app that I should have on my iPhone, or I should have on my desktop, that I can that I take my notes on, just like any note-taking app. So if I build that app, and what I'm proposing effectively, and will propose to them as well, is to actually have a way, and what I discuss with them basically is to say, well, let's try to create a way so that note-taking app can actually have a common interface, which is effectively that common interface is represented by these endpoints, where when I have my note-taking app, I can actually install it on Personium or on my freezer, right? And I think that would be really interesting, because it would sort of allow other developers, like to the open source community, to actually build one app and know that they're actually sort of 5 users instead of 1, or what have you, and maybe tomorrow 1,000 or what have you. And I think Personium itself is an interesting project. I think all sort of people who talk about personal servers have similar kinds of goals and interests and ideologies, if you want. I haven't delved into it, but I think their idea is also to have different personal servers in different places, and in similar ways, effectively. And they view, and I guess they're working on different people, as I understand it, different companies actually hosting that data and offering that service to consumers. My approach, because I build it for myself, is that anybody should be able to do that. Ultimately, if you think about this at scale, if you think, well, personal servers are actually going to be a thing 5 years from now, obviously you will need companies, be it Fujitsu or Google, that run a service on personal servers that they offer to consumers. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it's time to go to...
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So then,
let's unmute this first.
So, hi, Sol, can you hear me?
I do hear you.
Can you hear?
Yes. I'm going to start with you. Is it?
Let me see
Everything's fine?
projects. So no. I'm just thinking what kind of echo we're creating with the microphone.
Just trying to picture what you're doing.
Yes, it's a bit difficult. So I will mute myself. I will just ask you to introduce yourself to get started, and I might mess a little bit around so that if your face gets in the way of the slides. But I think we're good otherwise. Okay, so thank you very much, Soel, for agreeing to give a presentation here. As your slides indicate, you're from Vienna, and I'll let you go from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And also thank you all for participating in this meetup. And I also have to thank Salman because he provided me many inputs and pointers. Hopefully we can maybe go back again to his interesting talk also at the end to maybe find, after considering the concepts that I developed, how we can talk with about Salman's maybe idea. Anyway, it's a pleasure. My name is Sohail Human. I teach internet economics and also corporate IT and this kind of courses at Vienna University of Economics, and also cognitive science at University of Vienna. I have a mixed background of cognitive science, AI, sociology of science, and my research mainly is focused on human-centric computing, accountable AI, sociology of technology, and also you can imagine when you work on this kind of things, also privacy, consent, and this kind of topics are also very important ones that we do tackle. Today, I will go through two sets of slides, which we presented as a part of one of our projects, which is called Expedite project. And these are the slides that we already presented at MyData Global. I hope this wouldn't be boring for the ones who were participating in the meetup and also participated in our session, but hopefully maybe after the MyData Global presentations and also the whole conference, maybe we come up at the end with novel discussions. Let's see. Anyway, I think it's enough for introduction. The first sets of slides, or the first presentation, is called Roadmap to Human-Centric Digital Economy. And let me see how we can start it. Okay, yes. And I have some basic slides at the beginning because I have no idea what kind of audience I'm talking about, and because we are also we have the same meetups in Vienna, and normally there are also some people, some interested citizens like non-experts who also participate. That's why I have some basic slides at the beginning. Sorry if this is too basic, but the problem in the way that we define it is that in the current situation, more personal data is being produced than ever. And the business model or data models of many of the companies, especially the giant companies, is to collect more and more data, to perceive data, personal data, as siloed commodity owned and controlled by data controller, not necessarily data subjects. This is not a general fact like that there are competing data models and business models, but one can say that this is the mainstream. And considering this business model, more and more personal data are collected by this data controllers because this is in line with their business models. I can summarize this picture like this, like, I don't know if you see my mouse, but we have different data controllers and we have data subjects here. And as you see, data controllers are collecting their data. Contrary to what Salman said, the data mainly is stored on servers of data controllers, and there are even some data controllers in the middle who are in the business of trading personal data without having any direct interaction with the users. And that's a problem which causes, actually the situation causes many different issues. One of them is the security issue. While you were saying that Salman's project has issue, but if you consider the existing data model also, we have security problems there as well. This kind of news headlines are very common nowadays, and we have heard them that many times that we even ignore them. It's very normal to say that, for example, 50 million users, I don't know, data have been revealed or, I don't know, published openly. And this is a big problem. Another problem that is caused clearly is the privacy problem. People do produce this kind of data, or this data are collected about people. We can profile people based on this data. And then this can invade personal privacy of every single person who is interacting with the system. Potentially, doesn't mean that always happens, but this is a potential danger. And it's not about also personal privacy of people, every single user. It's a collective problem. When you share your contact list, for example, you're sharing personal data of other people, your friends, your colleagues. And this kind of data model which collects data, it's not just, it doesn't really just invade privacy of one single person, but a collective set of people who have personal data of each other and share it with data controllers. And in many cases, this happens without the consent of people who really own that data. You never ask your friends, for example, if I'm allowed to share your data with Telegram, with WhatsApp, with different apps that provide messaging functionalities. You just share it, and then you're sharing someone else's personal data. And this could also have socioeconomical impact. For example, we can imagine that in some elections, we can use this data in order to profile people, and then to have some sort of marketing of elections, marketing of votes, and that could potentially change the results of elections. It can potentially harm our democracies. Just imagine if in one election, just 1% of voters would change their behavior based on online marketing of votes, then the whole society would go another way in the next 4 or 5 years, depending on the country. This is a big issue. Another issue is dominance, especially this is important for us in Europe, but also everywhere in the world. If we have companies, big companies that do have this data and use this data for their business, it's very hard for others to compete with them, especially for the younger ones, for the startups, if they want to also use personal data. As a result, I think this portability, novel portability solutions is a good way to go. That's also one of the motivations behind GDPR. If you read GDPR text or policy documents around it, actually, there are kind of two main justifications written in the text. One is personal privacy of every single individual. The second one is a kind of single digital market, at least in Europe. And that's a big motivation behind all of the many of this discourse surrounding personal data processing and privacy. And you can name many other potential issues. Again, I should just mention that and emphasize that this doesn't mean that whoever is processing personal data is harming people, but this is a potential issue which is going on. As a summary, I can say that in digital societies, data is a key resource for economic growth. Many companies use human experience to translate into behavioral data for prediction, and they can even sometimes nudge users to a certain behavior in order to make profit. All of this is a kind of common knowledge at the moment, but I think it's good sometimes to remind ourselves, if I want to just change the perspective and look at whatever I said from more user perspective, one I also can say that many users do not know how and for what their data is employed. Our research and research of many of the colleagues in different universities and research institutes shows that more than 90%, and some research even shows 98% of people cannot really make sense of these privacy policies or terms of usages, all of these kind of documents that people are consenting to. Even if you ask them to read them, even if you tell that, okay, there is a meaningless sentence in this document, just spot it, just find it for me. Many of the people even cannot do that. And considering this, it's very hard to expect people to control their personal data in this situation. And this really raises serious questions about privacy, about consent, as Salman said, about autonomy of people, autonomy of data, freedom of people, and so on. Okay, this was about problem, or at least the way that we formulate the problem, because this is also, I think it's important, and you will see in the rest of the talk, I think these positions are important. These are standpoints that we are framing a problem from our own perspective. And this is the way, at least in the Expedite project, we have framed the problem. And these are the things that we hope to tackle. What can be done? I think one option that we have, and is a very important point, is policy and regulations anyway. GDPR had a good impact, although I will talk about it in a second. And this, I think at the end, we need some sort of a standardizations. The API that Salman was talking about could potentially become a standard. It could potentially be something like USB-C, could be a sort of a standard that even governments try to enforce and say that, look, if you want to develop APIs based for personal data usage, these are the standards that you have to use, because we do respect data portability. You can imagine many other perspectives that policies and regulations could be helpful, but also I think at the end, public awareness and public engagement, NGO, scientists, engineers, the whole MyData movement, whatever we are doing actually, is a part of also trying to solve the problem. Because at the end, the problem should be solved based on the co-creation of a new world that we do make together. And I do think that this is not just on experts and scientists or policymakers, but also on public, and we have to be actively involved in that. Plus many novel solutions that could come up. As a part of this Expedite project that I'm talking about, we also work on computational cognitive models and agents for supporting users to manage their consents and other potential solutions, knowledge graphs, and how to use semantic web to deal with portability issues and so on, which I don't talk about them in this talk today. Also, what Salman presented could be seen as a novel solution that can be helpful, but also we can think about many other ones. There are many colleagues who believe that we have to change the business models of digital economy, otherwise we have no chance. To the point that people are using this kind of, in this way, personal data, all of these solutions at the end could not provide an ultimate solution. That could be also an argument, and there are many other arguments as well. What we do here in Vienna as a part of our research is, as I said, we are running a project which is called Expedite. Own Your Data, which was also mentioned by Salman, is one of the partners, and also Vienna University of Technology. And we also founded MyData Austria as a part of this project. Actually, I'm talking with you as a founder of MyData Austria because we had this Expedite project. Otherwise, we would potentially also establish MyData Austria, but Expedite really enabled us to do that. Among others, something that we do and we did as a part of Expedite is to test GDPR. I have called it GDPR exploratory studies and its implementation and perception in the general public. What it means is that we simply sent out hundreds of GDPR-based requests to many different data controllers. I will talk about it, at least partially show you what kind of what kind of research we did when I opened the other slide, but maybe let's move on a little that you just have a little idea about the general perspective of the project. Another important outcome of the project is what we call a human-centric roadmap towards digital economics. The idea is simple. We want to develop a human-centric roadmap for Austria, and later actually we called it an Austrian perspective towards digital economics. And if you ask me, okay, what is a roadmap and why this is important? Because normally we think about technical solutions or policies and so on. The simple way of answering this question is, okay, to open up Wikipedia or any other encyclopedia and say, okay, this is the definition of a roadmap. I wouldn't read it out, but you can maybe take a look at it. But in general, I can say a roadmap serves as a communication tool, a high-level document that helps articulate strategic thinking, the why behind both the goal and the plan for getting there. It could be a potentially an interdisciplinary tool that makes it possible for us to provide multidimensional solutions and strategies. You can imagine a roadmap could have a specific location, team, time span, target group, goal, and based on all of this, we can develop different roadmaps. And this is important for us because there have been other roadmaps as well regarding personal data processing or digital economy. But we do think that the roadmap that we are developing, it's something which is very much needed, and it doesn't mean that not the other roadmaps are needed. What is the purpose of a roadmap in general, not only ours? You can just think of, I don't know, it could be used for planning, it can show the current situation, and that's what we are also doing. As I said, we are testing how GDPR has been implemented in Austria, but also generally from an Austrian data subject perspective. We are trying to also predict future developments, but this is just about very a small step towards future 3 to 5 years and what should be done. And this also can provide us to understand the needs and provide alternatives for future. Saying all this, if you ask me, okay, these are general ideas behind the roadmap. Why do you develop a roadmap? This is the classical answer, which you just say it's repeating whatever I said in one single paragraph, which is important. But for me and for us, the second option is much more important. Any roadmap from our perspective has a stand, and it's a conscious choice that we make and to shape a roadmap based on a particular perspective. That's important because then you say that, okay, I want to look at the problem from this perspective. This perspective could be a conceptual perspective or perspective of a minority or from a particular society or group of society. And our perspective in Expedite project and the roadmap that we are developing is what we call human-centric perspective, or we are working on human centricity. Simple to say, what we mean by human centricity is to trying to take individual, which we call cognitive, and social, which for us has two perspectives, collective and contextual dimensions of every single end user and all end users into account. Like some of the questions that colleagues asked from Salman, also for me at least, having this human-centric perspective in mind, was also regarding this, that, okay, would users use it? What kind of user can use it? Would this be sustainable? And for me, a part of answer, maybe there wouldn't be an ultimate answer, but a part of answer at least lies on this human-centric perspective towards technology and also in particular personal data processing, which is our topic. We perceive humans as cognitive systems which are enacting in their socio-contextual environment. This is a classic perspective from an activism perspective in cognitive science. And the idea that we have is that if you want to empower users, you have to consider their socio-cognitive needs, values, capabilities, limits, and so on. the solution that Salman provides could be amazing for some part of the society. It could be very helpful if for the ones who can use it, but it doesn't mean that it should solve all of the problems. If you look at, I don't know, what my mother, for example, can do with the computer, not necessarily she will be empowered directly by that solution if we just accept her to use that solution herself. But maybe if we add the collective aspect to it, maybe if someone would support her, she also can be empowered by the provided solution. The idea that we have is that if we take a human-centric approach, the approach that the framework that we talk about, we develop, and I will go through into more details in a second, but not that much of details, is that this can support designers and developers to also consider socio-cognitive aspects, which in many cases are missing. And I have an example showing you how we just simply ignore if we wouldn't have these glasses on our eyes. And this can also provide help us to develop new data management, privacy management, or consent obtaining mechanisms. But also what is very important for us, and that's actually what we are doing as a part of the project, is also it provides us a framework to evaluate the existing mechanisms. And hopefully this would empower end users in a pluralistic way, by understanding their individual difference and also the differences that we have within different social groups, in different countries, in different cities, and so on. If I want to just bring you an example, if you just think about consent obtaining mechanisms on internet, normally, if you talk with lawyers, and we have been involved in many different interviews with lawyers, lawyers see consent as kind of static concept, which there is a consent that can be obtained and that's it. When we take a human-centric perspective, say that no, there is a human who is giving this consent, and consent is a socio-cognitive action. And you should consider all of the different dimensions that a human has when the human is giving the consent. The cognitive part refers to all of the cognitive processes that are involved, how the person is perceiving the system, what are her needs, what are her values, what are her limits, what are her capabilities, and so on, how the user interface has been designed to obtain this consent, and what is this interaction between these two. This is something that maybe people don't call it cognitive, but to some extent are considered sometimes, at least in system design. But in particular, when we don't have that human-centric perspective, the other two concepts normally are ignored, not always, but in some cases, and I have an example for you in the next slide regarding that. The collective aspect refers to the fact that humans are living in a society, in a community always, and we are social agents, and research shows that if you take your friend's privacy setting or security setting, there is a high chance this is similar to yours. And if you take the privacy setting of a person from another social group, there is a high chance that it is not that similar to yours. If you provide people information regarding how their friends or how an expert manages her own personal data or her own privacy settings, this research shows that it has a lot of impact on the way that people behave. But normally when you're faced with this kind of pop-ups, this cookie pop-ups or consent obtaining pop-ups on internet, they don't tell you that, okay, by the way, all of your friends click on more information, which is also funny that it is called more information, and set up their consents, for example, or change their settings. Or they don't tell you that, by the way, experts suggest you to provide this kind of consent or ignore this kind of consent obtaining mechanisms. No, we don't provide this normally to users because the systems that we have at the moment are not really designed from a human-centric perspective by reasons, because of because of the business model which is behind it and so on, and we talked about it. The contextual aspect also partially has overlap with collective. The idea is that at the end, the consent is given in a context, but also it is contextual at the end. You can say that, okay, you're allowed to access my data, but till tomorrow, only in emergency cases, only when I'm happy, only when this is a family issue, and so on. All of this also is kind of missing. And then we don't have any record of our consents. I am happy that Salman has at least this database of his own web browsing history, but most of the people don't have that, also don't have consents. And I'm sure if we ask Salman, he doesn't have a list of all of the consents that he has given, and I think at least, and many of the people also don't have that. Considering this perspective, we can do cool stuff. For example, this is a result of one of our studies. We have evaluated the consent mechanisms of, or consent obtaining mechanisms of different companies: Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft. In this study, we have asked a set of experts to conduct some user scenarios, and then based on a framework that we have, they have reported different design patterns in the system. What we have here is not really a legal terminology, but a kind of cognitive, scientific, and user-centric terminology. It means that these experts have reported that there are information hiding. It means that we have asked them to find some information in these consent mechanisms, these pop-ups that Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon show to the user to gain the consent, and then they couldn't find this, and they have reported that it seems that the information has been provided in a way which is kind of hidden. For a human, it is hidden. Maybe from a legal perspective, you can say that, yes, if you click here and here and here and here and here and here, after 10 clicks, you will find this information, and then legally this is visible and transparent. But for a normal human, and in this case, at least in this particular study, they were not even normal human. They were all experts working in the field. It wasn't, they couldn't find this. Or they have reported asymmetry in the design. Like there is a big green button which says I consent or okay, and then a link which is called more information, and you don't really think that this is for consent consent obtaining, and if you click on this, then you can set up your information, and so on. Again, if you have this human-centric perspective, even this very simple framework, you can start to evaluate existing systems from a novel perspective, we hope at least. And as you see, the collective and the contextual aspect is completely missing. None of these companies, at least based on the research of, or based on this results of this particular research, and its study setup, consider collective aspects of human behavior and also contextual aspects of human behavior, which, simple to say, for me at least as a computer scientist and also cognitive scientist, means that they are not really obtaining consents in a human-centric perspective. If this is legal or not goes back to my other point that I said regulations are very important. Maybe at the end, at some point, we will live in a world that we would have some kind of evaluations, some kind of standardizations, that then it would be illegal to obtain consent which is not human-centric. I don't know, but at least we are trying to push this forward. Considering all of these kind of things that we are doing, the roadmap that we are developing is human-centric. It covers socio-technical and socio-cognitive aspects, we hope, and for sure also socioeconomic aspects. It's an Austrian roadmap anyway, which doesn't mean that it is for Austria, but it means because we are in Austria, and also we conducted many interviews with different experts in different disciplines. All of them were in Austria, and also government of Austria has kindly funded the project. That's why we call it an Austrian perspective. And for sure, being Austrian also means it is European and also it considers GDPR anyway as an important aspect of it. Plus, pluralism is very important for us, considering minorities. Our research shows that people in minority are much more in danger of being harmed or being invaded by privacy issues or personal data processing issues. And we are trying to include as many different perspectives as possible. As I told you, our aim is to provide a roadmap which considers a 3 to 5 years prediction towards future, or strategy making towards future. And the methodology that we are using at the moment is experimental evaluation of the GDPR, which I will show you in a second. And also we have conducted many different surveys, interviews with experts and also citizens, and also focus group studies. And our perspective is that this could be very helpful for Austrian government and also European Union in order to shape future funding calls and regulations. We hope that at the end, having this document, materializing all of the interviews, all of the perspectives from different experts, and also materializing this concept, these evaluations that we are conducting based on this perspective, would make it possible for government to really have a good tool in order to justify their future fundings and also the future regulations. Also, we hope that this would also enable us to collaborate with Austrian NGOs and startups in order to develop solutions. Like Salman has this solution, maybe we can sit together and say, okay, let's make it a project which, at least from our perspective, is a little more human-centric. Doesn't mean that his project is not human-centric. Actually, I really liked his approach, and I do think that many of the aspects are human-centric. But maybe we can add more and more concept to it to make it even more human-centric. And one of the reasons that I'm giving this talk is that also, as I told you, this is at the end, from my perspective, considering my philosophical background, this is an Austrian perspective. Doesn't mean that this is for Austria, but we really hope that we would be able to collaborate with other colleagues all around the world in order to be able to develop similar roadmaps here and there, or maybe merging the similarities and developing a European roadmap, or I don't know, a global roadmap, which also considers the similarities that we have, or maybe starting a discourse about what we are developing. Before going to the discussion, I just want to also, because this was what also you asked when you invited us to give this talk, I also want to show you one of the examples of GDPR tests. It's here. And you should know that I'm in a very weird situation because I'm a teacher. I normally look at the eyes of my students and have feedback and see how they feel. And now I'm just talking in my room and with no feedback from you guys. I hope that you're following and at least someone is in the room, at least, because I can't see you. Anyway, this is another part of the Expedite project, just a tiny part of one of the parts. And here we try to conduct the experiment with our students. And the idea was to test GDPR, how GDPR is implemented in Austria. Besides this experiment, we had a bunch of other experiments, sent out hundreds of other GDPR-based requests of data access, data information. We asked companies and data controllers, what kind of data do you have about us? Or the data subject which was sending the emails, or with whom you have shared your data, for which purpose are you using data. We have asked them to delete the data or provide the data to test the data portability And also, we asked also to delete some part of the data. We also tried to test different aspects, like the language-wise. Would it be helpful if you write it in German or in English? Would there be any change if you be polite or not polite? What if the data subject just writes one line of data access request, or writes a long legal email, and this kind of things? We had many different things that we tried to test in order to see what are the different factors that can influence the way that companies or data controllers answers a data request email. And here in this particular slide that I'm showing, and actually the credit should go to Elmar Kisling, or colleague from TU Wien, we tried to integrate this in a study program and a particular course. The idea was that we had a course in semantic web, and we wanted to test data portability based on the GDPR, and ask our students in order to collect their data and to test how GDPR is implemented in Austria. And we had 92 participants, 22 groups of 4 students, and at the end, 20 finalized projects were delivered to us. And the idea was that they had to choose a set of company or a company, and then send GDPR-based data requests, ask for their own data, then analyze the data and try to see if they can develop RDF structured data based on the data that they received. And these are just some of the examples that of the data controllers that our students chose. And if you consider the MyData logo, these are the different sectors that we covered in this very experiment. As I said, this is just a tiny one in comparison to the whole project. And because we had a human-centric perspective, normally we try to see the whole process from the user's perspective. When they want to send out these emails, they fill out a questionnaire, reporting their emotion, reporting what they expect, reporting the details of their request, and also reporting what do they expect, what kind of data they want to receive, and so on, just to record it. And when they receive the answer, the first email, again, there is another questionnaire that the data subject fills out, and then they report their feeling after reading the email that they have received. Are they satisfied with the answer, and so on? Can they make sense of the data? These are some of the interesting reports, for example, that we have chosen for you. What response do you expect? This was the question, and then different students have answered like this, or we can call them data subjects. One of them has said, "I think they will ask something to delay the process in hope I will lose interest," or "No idea. I think they currently consider deleting all the data. Not sure if that's appropriate." Don't think they will answer. "I probably will receive a lot of paper containing database dumps or similar." And this student actually was right. Many of the data controllers, although it is against GDPR, send printed copies of the data to the address of the data subject. Many of them asked for more information, like passport and so on, in order to provide data, which I will cover. Nothing relevant, mostly just obvious data, but not all the data they collect. Provide me the data or ask for additional proof of identity, and so on. As you see, and we had many of this kind of not very positive attitudes towards the whole process before sending the data. I have the diagrams in other slides and reports, but here we haven't included it. This is also the report about identification requests by data controller, which is a very big issue. When you ask for your data, you have to also prove yourself, which is prove that your identity. It's very rational, but it's a very big obstacle, especially we don't have that much of regulations and standards and APIs which can support this. And as you see, you send a request to a company which doesn't have that much of your personal data, and then they ask for your registration forms or your passport and many other sensitive data they want to receive in order to provide your data. And these are the ones that we have received in this particular study. And the way that the companies respond was like this. We also had companies who sent USB sticks, for example, as in a packet, in an envelope. As you see, even 6 of the and as you see, we also tested how the response was formulated, or how long did it take for you to receive a response. Or other research shows that there is a good portion of companies who never answered this kind of request, interestingly. And as you see, many of the students, at least the ones who have reported it, didn't receive the data type that they expected, data format that they expected. And these are all different sorts of data format that you receive. We intentionally asked for, I think, JSON in this study, but many of the companies just didn't follow it. At the end, at least based on this research, I think companies normally do answer if they answer professionally. Normally they have a template and copy paste it, but based on GDPR, they have 1 month time, but or research shows that it takes much more than one month, and in many cases it needs many emails. It's not that simple that you send an email and then receive your data. In some cases, it takes months till you get your data and have to provide many other information. And also, as I said, this particular set of reports is not that objective, but we are going to publish also many diagrams, at least, that shows current situation. And it doesn't mean that it stays like this. We are aware that maybe next year everything would be different. These are some sort of self-destructive research. We do the research, we publish it, we send it to data controllers. Hopefully we change their behavior. Anyway, we are also in contact with them. We are trying to also perceive the whole perspective from their perspective, the whole scene from their perspective. We hope that this would be different. At the moment, I would say that for a normal data subject, it's not that easy to get the data and make sense of the data. That's the conclusion. And again, we do conduct this kind of evaluation because we always think about humans, users who want to use the system, or who want to go through a legal procedure. And that's what we call human-centric perspective. Thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully someone is still there.
So, yes, thank you, Salman. I think you can hear me. Just have to figure out how to, well, I guess not switch back to me yet, but are there any questions, basically? Any questions in the room or any questions remotely?
I also have a set of questions ready for this conference. So
okay, but you have one.
Take a look at them, but feel free to ask any questions that you, oh, sorry.
Should I ask? Yeah, thanks for the talk and the references as well. I appreciate that. I thought there were a few really interesting things about it. One was the consent issue is a big issue. I always find that funny that we all consent to stuff we have no idea what we're consenting to. I'm not sure if there's anything that we can do beyond what beyond sort of knowing that all of these sites, the chart that you showed, and if there's anything we can do with that data, except sort of be aware that we're all giving consent to stuff which we have no idea about. So that would be one question. And then the other question with regards to the students who did all these requests, I'm wondering if they...
I think I want to add to that question.
Okay.
Would it help, for instance, to share screenshots of settings on phones, on Android, on iOS, or configurations, what kind of things could we encourage to precisely fight this idea that we're all alone when providing consent?
Mm-hmm. I think what we can do, actually, for us, this is a spectrum. You know, we should acknowledge, and this is also what research shows. We have long-term actually research. I think goes back to a century before regarding privacy, and there. And it's very well, at least in the social sciences, developed that we have different types of humans, different types of people when we are talking about privacy. And we can also add to this also from technical perspective. People have different levels of technicality. It's not fair. That's very simple. If someone can't make sense of a text to gain consent based on that, I do think that we can think of different options for different types of people. If you, in our papers, for example, we have developed, based on the literature in general also, the concept of informed consent, information-based consent, and trust-based consent. And if you can say that, okay, an information-based consent maybe is that when you read the consent and read the text and really understanding and give it consent based on that. Inform-based consent can be seen as, this is one option, and some people just change this to concept, is that when the information is available, but you cannot make sense of it, or you don't read it and just give the consent. But also we can think of trust-based consent and say that, okay, as you go to your doctor, you trust your doctor, you let the doctor to practice whatever she want to practice. And if something goes wrong, we have NGOs, we have data protection officers, we have, or in the medical case, we have the authorities who take care of the rest. Here also, I think we should think of different types of consent obtaining mechanisms. If consent is one of the lawful basis for practicing personal data processing. One option that some people say that is to trying to not obtaining any kind of consent, and this is also have been foreseen in GDPR. One option is to just not gaining any consent and say using the other lines in GDPR in order to practice a lawful personal data processing. Another option is, as you said, trying to push this collective aspect of consenting, providing settings. Even I would not be surprised if there would be a regulation which says that, okay, when you want to gain consent, you have to provide examples and say that these different people have provided it, or at least provide the mechanisms. If people want to share that data, this would be possible. At the moment, in front of a monitor, every person is alone, and I think this is not the way that humans work. That's at least my problem as a cognitive scientist. You know.
Okay, thank you. And the second question?
There's also just on that. I think there's also this concept of like social consent, where you see that, or you know, in other media you have like influencers, you know, from YouTube and what have you, where you know. And I'm wondering whether there's a possibility to use that. Like, I'd be really interested in a place where I can go and see, you know, MyData type influencers saying what, if they're still using Facebook, for example, what sort of privacy settings they have set for Facebook, and see if others can propagate. Like you said, if sort of we all follow around our social network in a way, and our privacy settings are similar. So sort of that using that kind of influence can be interesting as well. Anyway, that's just an idea. The other question I had was with regards to the study that you did with the students. I'm wondering if there was any kind of follow-up from the students about using that data, or whether that encouraged other students to also do GDPR requests, or whether it was just too difficult.
Actually, it was, and some of the students started to send this request and ask their friends to do that, and some of them even came up developing apps based on this. Like, they asked for some sort of data, and then they developed an app which uses that data. I think it was a very good experience, for the students at least. If you want, I think we have the documents and reports regarding this and all of the different apps that later students develop based on that, which some of them are surprisingly good, I think. I think there was a group which used location data that they gained from a company to develop some sort of interesting stuff, which were very surprising, for example. And another group I remember used music data gained from, I think, a Spotify or one of the companies, which was again very interesting to see how they uh, came up with novel applications of the data that they receive. This could be also, just adding to your influencers comment, previous ones, I think even informing people what kind of data could be available could also enable them to come up with innovative idea if we really want to make this something that everyone is practicing.
So I'll certainly get back to that later. First, I'm wondering if there are any other questions in the room or elsewhere, because Chris is still up amazingly in Korea.
I think it's 3 a.m. Yeah.
Even 4, I think.
Sorry.
It's 4. No, this is interesting though. Thank you.
Just wondering if you're planning, for example, to partner with consumers protection organizations, and what kind of channels are you considering to do education about this issue, to reach out to the general public? So are you planning to organize initiatives? Are you planning, how are you build case studies so they can be covered by the press? What's your strategy?
Mm-hmm. I hardly heard you, but I might missed some of the points. But in general, the next step for us is to kind of use different means that you said. When we publish the paper that we are writing about this particular studies, we do release also press news entries and would have interviews. Also, we are in contact with Austrian government and different ministries and different branches in order to also push this idea. When the roadmap is there, we hope that we will send it to Parliament, we will send it to different ministries, to different NGOs. You know, at the end, we believe that this is about co-creating the future, and we need all different sorts of solutions and means. As I told you, I think we will release all of this openly, and if you come up with a better idea, we really support that you take whatever we produce, I don't know, take it to the parliament in Switzerland and say, okay, this is the case, now let's have a regulation. Or Salman could maybe take it and say, okay, now I add a new layer to my architecture because now I want to also, I don't know, have this collective perspective to it. At the end, we are trying to provide basic information for whoever wants to be active. And I do think that that's what you are saying. It's very important. It's about also kind of engaged science, as we call it, and a kind of activism which is based on science, based on the results of this kind of research, and should be done. Otherwise, it would just stay as an academic work which do have impact, but not as much as we expect.
I have another question for you. Are you engaging with Max Schrems, who is in Vienna with this privacy NGO?
With Max, we just one of our projects was funded. I'm not unfortunately the funding agency just has requested us to not reveal the information till next month. But yes, as a partially as a follow up. We have a project which to some extent also includes what Salman proposed about providing this information of the expert information to users, but it goes much more beyond that as well. Yes, Max is involved, and in or general consortium or network. but also many others. And I do think that at the end, this should not only stay in Vienna or Austria. You guys in Switzerland are doing a great job. We have also MyData Global and many other people all around the world. In California, we have good connections, and I don't know, and also different countries. I don't want to name them. At the end, I think we have to solve the problem together, and there would be no problem. We should just keep pushing and pulling to change the dynamics, you know. And we would be very happy to see that next year or in 2 years, the result of our research is not valid anymore. That would be actually very positive. If we see that in 2 years, companies behave better and all of the things that we have published is wrong, that would be an amazing result of our project, I think, to see that we could contribute. And it doesn't mean that we have only done that, but if we could see that we were also one of the actors who were pushing to change the perspective and to change the scene.
Thank you. I think we can thank you.
Thank you so much.
I will just take the opportunity, since you asked the question on how we could collaborate. So let me share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it?
Yes.
So I've been doing something very similar with some people here in the room, actually. So if you go to the wiki of my organization, for instance, for Uber, you can see a lot of different information about Uber as a data controller, what it collects, and also where to ask for your data. This is structured data, so this is also RDF. This is also semantic web-based. And on top, if you look here,
actually, that email address in particular, just as a positive feedback, it's great to have that, because in some of our projects, we really need to have access to that email address. If you want to automatize some of the process, you just need to have a repository of this kind of email addresses, which is great, actually. I didn't know that you have this.
So we have everything queryable for hundreds of companies, including ad tech companies.
That's great. That's a very great news for me.
So so Marie-Pierre in particular, who is in the back here, has contributed a huge amount of them as well, or of websites and so on. So you can extract from the privacy policy the email address automatically. But then if you look at this little pop-up here, you won't see it. You won't see it now because it will open in a different window, which I'm not sharing. But if I click on it, it's just a mail to link, basically. It generates a subject access request to the company based on that email address, using a template that is itself collaborative, just like the entire wiki. So it's a space to create the network that you were mentioning and to activate it towards the same goals. I didn't know you were going to talk about this, but we're very much thinking in a similar ways, it seems.
We also have a tool which produces this kind of emails. I can also send it to you. This is open source. If you like, you can also include that one.
Sure.
As in German and English, it shapes the emails for users. So.
Okay, then Chris, we're about to wrap up, but if you have yourself something to share, you mentioned the conference. If you'd like to share your screen or tell us a little bit more.
Oh, okay. Well, so MyData Korea Hub is we're planning our first meeting in November 21st. I think it's going to be around like 9 to maybe like 10 a.m. or actually maybe earlier in Europe. And we're planning on having a live Facebook feed. So, but it'll probably be mostly in Korean, but there will be 2 talks that will be in English. So if you guys are interested, then please join. I'll share the info on Slack once I have it for sure. And thank you both speakers. It was very it's very, very interesting, and this is the first hub meeting I've ever been to, and this is very, very helpful. So thank you very much, Paul, Sohel, and Salman. Yeah, thank you very much. Very nice to meet you guys.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Soel, as well, for contributing to today. And we'll have more meetings. We don't know exactly with what schedule, but you're always welcome to join us as well. So thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
I'm not sure they can see us. No, they cannot see us. Sorry. Yes, bye. We had a little problem here. So thank you.
Bye-bye.